Morning, everybody. Let's start. Now, today we are going to discuss disaster management. Let's start. Now, first of all, you have to know what is the definition of a disaster. Then are few terms that you have to cover up. One is called as vulnerability analysis and risk assessment. What is called as CBDM, that is community-based disaster management. What is called as capacity building. So let's cover up all these terms. One by one, we'll cover up all these terms. Then look into some of the important disasters. And also see that why the frequency of disaster is enhancing day by day. Institutional framework needs to be covered up. So some institutions in India needs to be covered up. And also not only this, we will be also responsible for dealing with some other issues. For example, what are the initiatives taken for disaster management? So let's cover up disaster management comprehensively, and let's first of all discuss that what is the definition of disaster. Now see, when we talk about disaster, the frequency of disasters in the recent past have enhanced. There are many reasons behind it. For example, global warming and climate change can be one reason behind it. Then there can be other reasons also. For example, expansion of population can be another reason. Environmental degradation can be another reason. So there are numerous reasons for the frequency of disasters to enhance. And whenever disaster happens, whenever disaster takes place, human development would be pushed decades back. Whenever it takes place, human development would be pushed decades back. So what is essential today? Whatever you have earned till date would be pushed decades back. So what is essential today is not only effective disaster management, but one of the precondition for effective disaster management is good governance also. So that's it. Good governance is considered to be the precondition for effective disaster management. Clear? Effective disaster management. Now, when you talk about the proper definition of disaster, the proper definition of disaster has been given by a number of institutions. For example, UN has given one proper definition of disaster. Sir, if the blood group, mother blood group is O positive and the father blood group is A negative or B negative, then what will be the first child and second child blood group? See, positive and negative cannot be determined. Clear? But the number of blood group, type of blood group can be determined. Positive or negative, it can be due to the presence of rhesus factors. So, suppose the mother is, if the father's blood group is A negative or B negative, mother's blood group is O positive, and father's, let's take up father blood group A negative. Now, O means what? See, whenever we talk about A blood group, it should not have been asked in disaster management, but let's solve this question because it has been asked. So, if suppose we talk about A blood group, it can be homozygous A, that is AA, or it can be heterozygous A, that is AO. But when we talk about O blood group, it is always OO. It cannot be heterozygous, has to be homozygous. So, if suppose mother's blood group is O, it means OO, and father's blood group is A, it can be heterozygous A also, AO, or it can be homozygous A also. So you have to clarify that what it is. Otherwise, how the blood group would be determined? It's difficult to determine the blood group. So first of all, you have to clarify that what is the blood group. And if suppose the blood group is A, homozygous A, then the child would be what? The child would be having blood group A. But if it is, suppose, if we are taking OO and AA, homozygous A, then the blood group would be OA, that means A, and OA, that means A. OA, that means A, and OA, that means A. So blood group would be A. Clear? But if suppose it is heterozygous A, means the father is heterozygous A, then it would be OA, that means A, OO, that means O, OA, that means A, and OO, that means O. So 50% of the child would be of A and 50% of the child would be of O blood group. Clear? 50% of the child would be A and 50% of the child would be O blood group. Let's deal with that also. Fine. Now, let's start. So, first of all, let's deal with disaster management. In between, we'll discuss epidemics and pandemics. In that, we'll discuss the diseases. Clear? Now, let's cover up. Without wasting time, let's cover up. So, when you talk about proper definition of disaster has been given by Ministry of Home Affairs. And Ministry of Home Affairs has defined disaster as a occurrence in which normal pattern of life. Disaster has been defined as what? Disaster has been defined as occurrence in which the normal pattern of life and ecosystem would be disrupted, and emergency interventions would be made to save both life and property, because life and property happens to be in danger. Life and property happens to be in peril. So that's how disaster can be defined. So it is defined as an occurrence, or you can say a catastrophic situation in which the normal pattern of life and ecosystem would be disrupted, and emergency interventions would be required to save both life and property, because life and property is in peril. The second definition of disaster has been given by UN. So UN says that it is a misfortune in which the security of the community is disrupted. Misfortune. And security also means your resources. Your resources are also your security. So that would be disrupted. In this manner, disaster would be defined. Clear? But there are terms with which disaster has been confused with. For example, there's a term which is called as hazard. There's a term which is called as crisis. So let's see what is the difference between a hazard and a disaster, and a crisis and a disaster. Clear? So when we are talking about a hazard, if suppose a volcanic eruption takes place at a desolate place, there is no habitation over there, then that would be called as what? That would be referred to as hazard, because there is no habitation in that area. So this has not affected us in any way, affected people in any way. Clear? So this has not affected people in any way. So this would be called as what? It would be called as hazard. But if a hazard affects a sizable population, then it is termed as a disaster. If we are talking about hazard affecting a sizable population, then it is termed as a disaster. Clear? Or we can see that disaster happens at the intersection of society, hazard, and scientific development. So in that manner, it is defined. Now see, there is a difference between crisis and disaster. Crisis means what? Now you can say that you are undergoing a crisis. I can say that I am undergoing a crisis. But we cannot say that I am undergoing a disaster. That's literally wrong. But we can say that we were influenced by a disaster. So the implication is very clear, that the crisis can be, we can say that we are affected by crisis. So the implication is very clear. So it means that the crisis can be individualistic, crisis can be collective in nature. But when we talk about disasters, disasters are always collective in nature. Disasters are always collective in nature. And if suppose crises are improperly managed, you do not manage properly the crisis, then it would be resulting in a disaster. So when we talk about disaster management, we can see that disaster management includes 4 pillars. It includes what? Includes population. Disaster management includes 4 pillars. There are 4 pillars of components of disaster management. It includes what? It includes, first of all, preparedness. Second is what? Second is, first of all, you have to be prepared for disaster. In fact, first of all, you won't allow disaster to happen. So prevention would be there. Second would be preparedness. If suppose some disasters are there which are bound to take place, inevitable, however, so for that disaster you have to be prepared. Then you can see that there are some disasters for which you have to be prepared. For example, volcanic eruptions. Then if disaster happens, you have to take mitigation measures. Mitigation measures should be taken for disasters. And then we can see relief. So there are four components of disaster management. One is prevention, second preparedness, third is mitigation, and fourth is relief. Four pillars of disaster management, we can say. Clear? So first of all, you have to know what exactly is disaster. Write down please. The frequency of disasters. The frequency of disasters. Frequency of disasters have enhanced in the recent past. The frequency of disasters have enhanced in the recent past. Enhanced in the recent past. Due to factors like environmental degradation, due to factors like environmental degradation, population expansion, environmental degradation, population expansion, global warming, and climate change, global warming and climate change, environmental degradation, population expansion, global warming and climate change. Among many, whenever disaster happens, human development would be pushed. Whenever disaster happens, human development would be pushed. Decades back. Human development would be pushed decades back. As such, not only effective management of disaster is essential. As such, not only effective management of disaster is essential. Effective management of disaster is essential. But one of the prerequisite for disaster management is good governance as well. But one of the prerequisite for disaster management is good governance as well. Disaster management is good governance as well. Clear? Fine. So that's one of the prerequisite for effective disaster management, that is good governance. So that you have to know. Now see, as far as disaster management is concerned, that's one of the prerequisites. How we can define disaster? Right on. According to Ministry of Home Affairs, disaster has been defined as a catastrophic situation. Disaster has been defined as a catastrophic situation. In which the normal pattern of life, an ecosystem, is disrupted. Normal pattern of life and ecosystem is disrupted. And emergency interventions and emergency interventions is required to save both. And emergency interventions is required to save both life and property. Life and property. And why we are saying so? Because life and property happens to be in danger. So emergency interventions would be required to save both life and property. Now that's one definition of disaster. And do not accept any definition of disaster based on numbers. Do not do that. That any definition of disaster which should be based on numbers should be acceptable to us. For example, Mines Act of India defines disaster as an occurrence in which more than 10 people die. Cannot be acceptable as a definition of disaster. Suppose 10 of us commit suicide jumping from the 10th floor, would be considered as a disaster or foolishness? Clear. So it cannot be considered as a disaster. Another definition of disaster has been given by UN. That disaster is a misfortune in which the security of the community is disrupted. Write down. Disaster is a misfortune in which the security of the community, gets disrupted. The security of community gets disrupted. Disaster is a misfortune in which the security of the community gets disrupted. Clear? So that's how disaster would be defined. Fine. Now see, disaster never takes place in vacuum. When a hazard is responsible for affecting a sizable population, then it is termed as a disaster. Right on. Disaster never takes place in vacuum. Disaster never takes place in vacuum. When a hazard affects a sizable population, it means sizable population is essential. When a hazard affects a sizable population, it is termed as a disaster. Affects a sizable population, it is termed as a disaster. So that's how disaster would be. In context of crisis, let's discuss disaster also. First of all, when a hazard affects a sizable population, it would be termed as a disaster. Also, in other words, we can say, suppose we talk about other words, we can say that if we can see that disaster happens, or in other words, we can say, disaster happens at the intersection of society, hazard and scientific development, or disaster happens at the intersection of society, hazard and scientific development. What does that mean? Hazard, society, scientific development. See, understood that hazard is affecting society. It's a sizable population. It would be termed as a disaster. But why scientific development? Scientific development has been included. Why? Because although we have made strides in the field of science, advancement in the field of science, yet we are unable to deal with disasters. Clear? Yet we are unable to deal with disasters. So that's why we are saying it takes place at the intersection of hazard, society and scientific development. Clear? Here disaster takes place. Now also one can say that there is a difference between crisis and disaster. So let's find out the difference. So crisis can be, I have clearly explained that crisis can be individualistic, it can be collective in nature, but disasters are always collective in nature. Write down. There is a difference between crisis and disaster. There is a difference between crisis and disaster. Crisis and disaster. Crisis and disaster. Crisis can be. Crisis can be individualistic. Crisis can be individualistic or collective in nature. Or collective in nature. But disaster is always. But disaster is always collective in nature. But disaster is always collective in nature. Collective in nature. If crises are improperly managed, if crises are improperly managed, crises are improperly managed. So if you are responsible for not properly managing crisis, it results in disaster. It results in disaster. It results in disaster. Clear? So if crises are improperly managed, it would be resulting in disaster. Do remember that disaster management includes 4 components: prevention, preparedness, mitigation, and relief. Write down. Disaster management includes 4 components. Prevention, preparedness, mitigation, and relief. Prevention, preparedness, mitigation, and relief. So there are 4 components of disaster management. Clear? 4 components of disaster management. Now see, when you talk about disaster management, there are some other terms which also needs to be looked into. Now one term is called as what? One term is called as vulnerability and vulnerability analysis. That's one term. Vulnerability and vulnerability analysis. Now we can say that an area can be vulnerable for disaster on account of many considerations. It can be vulnerable for disaster on account of unsafe location. It can be vulnerable for disaster on account of not only unsafe location, it can be vulnerable for disasters on account of not only unsafe location, but we can see that it can be vulnerable for disasters on account of lack of coordination between government agencies. It can be vulnerable for disaster on account of lack of forecasting system. So there are many factors on account of which one area can be. It can be due to development in high risk areas, it can be environmental degradation, it can be vulnerable. So if you are responsible for making a systematic study of all these factors, this study would be called as what? This study would be referred to as vulnerability analysis. Clear? So this study is called as what? It is called as vulnerability analysis. Fine. Vulnerability analysis. This study would be referred to as vulnerability. But also do remember that as far as vulnerability analysis is concerned, risk assessment is concerned. So you can see that not only vulnerability analysis and risk assessment you have to know. See, vulnerability analysis is that, but when you talk about what exactly is vulnerability, risk assessment means what? That the amount of risk to which that area is exposed to. But when you are talking about vulnerability analysis, analysis means this what we have discussed, a systematic study of all these factors, and vulnerability itself can be defined. Vulnerability is defined as what? Cannot be defined as a positive characteristic. It can be defined as what? It can be defined as a negative characteristic, or of a group, or a society, or an institution. by virtue of which it is unable to cope up with, by virtue of which it is unable to recover, by virtue of which it is unable to resist, by virtue of which it is unable to refrain from the impact of disasters. So all the four words have four different meanings. So that's vulnerability. And see, also it can happen also that in the aftermath of disaster, after the disaster has taken place, vulnerability can enhance or vulnerability can reduce. In the aftermath of disaster, vulnerability can enhance how? It can enhance due to role played by antisocial elements. See, what happened was in Uttarakhand tragedy in 2013, when Uttarakhand tragedy occurred. After Uttarakhand tragedy, there were dead bodies lying. So we can see anti-social elements. They were responsible for chopping the fingers of dead bodies of ladies in order to steal the ring, because the dead bodies swell up. So they were not able to extract it by force. So they chopped up the fingers of dead bodies of lady in order to steal the ring. What kind of act this is? Inhuman. Clear? Or suppose in disaster affected area, a bottle of water sells at rupees 500, which usually comes at 20, 30. That is also responsible for enhancing the vulnerability in the aftermath of disaster. So it can be due to vested interest, it can be due to antisocial elements. But vulnerability can also reduce due to role played by community initiatives. For example, a group of youth like you all are present in that area, and you pledge that we would be helping people, we would be running a community kitchen, and would be doing so till our resources last. That would be nothing but reduction of vulnerability in the aftermath of disaster. So vulnerability can enhance also in the aftermath of disaster. Vulnerability can reduce also in the aftermath of disaster. Clear? Vulnerability can enhance in the aftermath of disaster. Vulnerability can reduce also in the aftermath of disaster. So that's how. See, according to IMD, disaster is what? Disaster has been defined as a serious accident, serious occurrence which is responsible for death and destruction. In that way, it has been defined. Right down. An area can be vulnerable for, and but the definition which I have given you, I have selected, I've seen all the definitions. The two definitions which appeals to me the most is the Ministry of Home Affairs definition and also the UN definition. So please do not write about IMD or NEMA definition. Try to write down the definition. And as far as NDMA is concerned, National Disaster Management Authority is concerned, each and every disaster has a different definition. Clear? Each and every disaster. There is a different definition for rail accident itself, which has recently taken place in Odisha. Clear? So we'll define all those things. Right down. An area can be vulnerable for, an area can be vulnerable for disaster. An area can be vulnerable for disaster on account of many consideration. An area can be vulnerable for disaster on account of many consideration. On account of many consideration. Vulnerable for disaster on account of many consideration. It can be due to many consideration. It can be due to unsafe location. It can be due to unsafe location. Unsafe location. It can be due to unsafe location. Lack of coordination. Lack of coordination between government agencies. Lack of coordination between government agencies. Lack of coordination between government agencies. Lack of forecasting system. Lack of forecasting system. So that may make an area vulnerable for disaster. Development in high risk areas. Development in high risk areas. High risk areas. unsafe location, lack of coordination between government agencies, lack of forecasting system, development in high risk areas, development in high risk areas, among many, among many. If a systematic study of all these factors is conducted, if a systematic study of all these factors is conducted, systematic study of all these factors is conducted, all these factors is conducted, it is referred to as, it is referred to as, referred to as vulnerability, it is referred to as vulnerability analysis, vulnerability analysis, it is referred to as vulnerability analysis, vulnerability analysis, vulnerability analysis. Clear? It is referred to as vulnerability analysis. But vulnerability has been defined as, but vulnerability has been defined as, vulnerability has been defined as a negative characteristic of, vulnerability has been defined as a negative characteristic of, a negative characteristic of, characteristic of society, society, institution, institution or group, society, institution or group, negative characteristic of society, institution or group, by virtue of which, by virtue of which, a virtue of which it is unable, it is unable to cope up, unable to cope up, cope up, cope up means meet, unable to cope up, refrain, resist or recover, or recover from the impact of disaster, or recover from the impact of disaster, from the impact of disaster. Clear? So this would be called as what? This would be referred to as vulnerability analysis and vulnerability. Clear? So vulnerability has been defined also, a negative characteristic of a group, institution or a society by virtue of which it is unable to cope up, refrain, resist or recover from the impact of disaster. That's how it is defined. Vulnerability can be defined. Clear? So what is the difference? We can see what is vulnerability analysis and vulnerability. Now we can also see that in the aftermath of disaster, vulnerability can enhance or reduce. Right down, in the aftermath of disaster, in the aftermath of disaster, aftermath of disaster, aftermath of disaster, vulnerability can enhance, vulnerability can enhance, can enhance or reduce, vulnerability can enhance or reduce. In the aftermath of disaster, vulnerability can enhance or reduce, enhance or reduce. It can enhance due to, it can enhance due to, it can enhance due to role played by antisocial elements, role played by antisocial elements or vested interest, role played by antisocial elements or vested interest, vested interest. Clear? So it can enhance, role played by antisocial elements or vested interest. So it can enhance, and it can also enhance due to what? It can also enhance due to not only role played by antisocial elements and vested interest, it can also reduce due to enhance due to role played by antisocial element. For example, we have discussed the example of chopping of dead bodies of the fingers of dead bodies of ladies. We have discussed in Uttarakhand tragedy, and it can reduce also. It can reduce due to the role played by whom? Role played by the community initiatives. I don't. It can reduce due to. It can reduce due to community initiatives. Community initiatives. We have discussed that. Suppose a group of youth like you all would be responsible for helping out the disaster, uh, helping out the victims over there. Clear? Not victims, helping out those affected by disasters over there. Then we can see that this would be through community initiative. If suppose you run a community kitchen, a group of youth like you all run a community kitchen, and you say that we would be doing so till our resources last, till our resources last, then it would be nothing but reducing the in the aftermath of disaster, it would be responsible for reducing the vulnerability. So I repeat, vulnerability can enhance due to in the aftermath of disaster, after the disaster has taken place, in the aftermath of disaster, vulnerability can enhance due to the role played by anti-social elements or vested interest, but it can reduce due to community initiative. Now, in this, we can discuss what is community-based disaster management. But before discussing that, let's talk about that why India is vulnerable for disaster. See, when you talk about India's vulnerability for disaster, India's vulnerability for disaster depends upon two main considerations. One is a natural consideration and second is the anthropogenic consideration. So natural consideration and second would be the anthropogenic consideration. So let's discuss those things. That what is the natural consideration? Suppose if we talk about vulnerability of India, see, vulnerability of India. Why is India vulnerable for disaster? Now, vulnerability of India can be divided into two considerations. You talk about vulnerability of India. Vulnerability of India can be divided into India. Why is India vulnerable for disaster? It can be divided into two broad considerations. The first consideration is what? The first consideration is the natural factors. Natural factors. And the second consideration is what? Second consideration is anthropogenic factors. Anthropogenic factors. For example, suppose if we say natural factors, the first thing that you have to know is that as far as 12% of India's landmass is concerned, of landmass, entire landmass of India. Now this is prone to what? This is vulnerable to what? It is vulnerable for floods. As naturally vulnerable for floods, 12% of India's landmass. Then we can see that 68% of India's cultivable area, 68% of India's cultivable area is prone to droughts. Is prone to droughts. Then the third thing is what? That we have a coastline of 7,516 kilometers. Out of this 5,700 kilometers of coastline, is prone to what? It is prone to tropical cyclones. So all these are natural for India. Tropical cyclones. See the points. Clear. Tropical cyclones. And we can see 58.6% of India's landmass is prone to earthquakes. So you can see 12% of India's landmass is prone to floods. 68% of India's cultivable area is prone to droughts. 5,700 kilometers of coastline is prone to tropical cyclones, and 58.6% of India's landmass is prone to earthquakes. So this is how we can see these are the natural factors which are responsible for India's vulnerability. But when we talk about anthropogenic consideration, that what are anthropogenic factors, how they are responsible for enhancing the vulnerability of India. The anthropogenic factors which are responsible for enhancing the vulnerability of India includes what? It includes anthropogenic factors include, first factor is what? First factor is population expansion. Development in high risk areas. For example, high risk areas. For example, if you are responsible for developing in floodplain areas, the risk of disasters would enhance because the river would be taking its own course at any time, because these are exclusive areas of the rivers. Fine. So development in high risk areas. So that's one, population expansion, development in high risk areas. Then also we can see population expansion, development in high risk areas. Also we can see that the other factors are what? Other factors include global warming and climate change. Urbanization, industrialization, all these are the factors which are responsible. All these are the factors which are responsible. Anthropogenic factors which are responsible. Now you can take a screenshot. If a question is asked on vulnerability of India, that why is India vulnerable for disaster? Sir, there are a chance of great disasters. Why go development many tunnel cutting the mountains in JNK? See, development would always take place because people need development. If you don't develop, you cannot live in that condition. Development will take place, but you have to develop in a sustainable manner. That is what is required. You don't have to damage the environment much. If you look at Jammu and Kashmir, if you look at Himachal Pradesh particularly, development is in a haphazard manner. Everywhere road is being constructed. This development is not good. There should be a check on this development. Because of that, you can see excessive rainfall took place in Himachal Pradesh this year. And this led to a number of disasters. Number of deaths took place because of that. Clear. So you cannot say that development should be taking place in this way. Fine. Development should not take place in this manner. So development is a must, but development should be taking place in a sustainable manner. That is required. So all these are, take a screenshot of all these factors. Vulnerability of India. All these factors. Fine. Development in mountainous region also. You know that mountain areas are prone to cloud bursting, to earthquakes. So if suppose development is taking place, then all the necessary measures should be taken. Fine. Now let's move forward and discuss another term which is called as community-based disaster management. We have discussed community initiatives, that we can reduce the vulnerability of disasters through community initiatives. through community initiatives. But what is community-based disaster management that you have to know? What is community-based disaster management that you have to know? Now, community-based disaster management means what? That first of all, let's know that how local community is responsible for reducing the risk of disasters. Joshimat. See, Joshimat is not a natural. We'll discuss Joshimat now. It's not a natural disaster. It is man-made. And we'll discuss in landslide how it occurred. Clear? So Joshimat is a man-made disaster. Now, let's move forward. Fine. Let's move forward. There's a term which is called as what? This term which is called as CBDM, community-based disaster management. So let's see what is community-based disaster management. CBDM, that is community-based disaster management. Community-based disaster management. And community-based disaster management means what? See, remember that sir, in many disasters occurred in the past, we get a follow-up to a certain period, like earthquakes in Turkey, Josimat in India. Very often we get a glance of what measures actually implemented in the newspapers. But there are more and more penetration in the pristine nature. How to make people aware about the progress. See, you have to make people aware about the progress only through government runs program and schemes. That what has been done, because the pristine nature of the area needs to be protected. If you indulge in degradation of those areas also, for example, core zones of biosphere reserve, if you indulge in degradation of those areas also, disasters would be frequently happening. Kerala floods took place. Why? Because you have disrupted the natural pattern of drainage in Kerala. Himachal floods took place. Why? Because of haphazard development in Himachal Pradesh. The water would be finding its own way or not. So development in a haphazard manner. Uttarakhand tragedy took place. Why? Because when Uttarakhand became a new state, roads were constructed in a haphazard manner. So these are the things which needs to be looked into. You have to look into the pristine nature. You cannot go on development and development in a manner that won't be sustainable in nature. It cannot be done. Because if you have to care for the environment and wants to reduce the risk of disasters, sustainable development is the only way out. Development, yes, development is required. Because if sustainable development, see, that's why often it is says that sustainable development, impact assessment, disaster risk reduction, environmental degradation, all are intertwined with each other. All are linked with each other. If environmental degradation is checked, sustainable development will take place. If sustainable development takes place, the risk of disasters would be reduced. The risk of disasters would be reduced. Clear? So all these are intertwined with each other. All these are linked with each other. Fine. Now when you talk about CBDM, community-based disaster management, remember that the local community would be considered as the first responder for disasters. Now, not only they have the traditional indigenous knowledge to deal with these disasters, they also have the knowledge about the local conditions and how to deal with these disasters. The only drawback that they are suffering from is that they are lacking technical knowledge. They do not have, they cannot negotiate with the government agencies. They are lacking funds for this purpose. And that's why when we talk about decentralizing disaster management, the best way out is what? The best way out is community-based disaster management. When you talk about decentralizing disaster management, the best way out is community-based disaster management. And that's why we talk about community-based disaster management. Now, in community-based disaster management, the first thing that we would be looking into is one institution which needs to be utilized for manifold functions, and that is the local schools. It should be utilized for manifold functions, multifarious functions. Clear? Because it can act as a shelter home. It can act as a food distribution camp. It can act as not only a shelter home, food distribution camp, but also it can act as what? It can act as a center for medical relief also. So it fulfills multifarious functions. Multifarious functions. But one thing which can be said about the community-based disaster management, that we are responsible for. One challenge is before CBDM, and that challenge is what? That challenge is the frequency of disasters have enhanced due to global warming and climate change. We have to meet that challenge. And for this purpose, capacity building, resource mapping, asset mapping is required. So when we define capacity building, it means that it is encompassing of, inclusion of all resources which is available within a society, institution or a group, and optimum use of these resources for mitigating the impact of disasters. So that would be called as capacity building. See, the carrying capacity of environment, concept of environment is that capacity to which it is unable to sustain, to which it is unable to maintain the proper ecosystem, so that the ecosystem is maintained for future also. That is the carrying capacity. And if suppose the carrying capacity is anyhow surpassed, then we can see environmental degradation would take place in that area. So it means the carrying capacity of an ecosystem, the concept of the carrying capacity of ecosystem is the ability of ecosystem to sustain it for future also. That is called as the carrying capacity. Right on CBDM, community-based disaster management. The local community is considered to be, community is considered to be the first responders for disasters. The first responders for disasters. The local community is considered to be the first responder for disasters. Responders for disasters, as they are aware of the local conditions, as they are aware of the local conditions, as they are aware of the local conditions, and have also adequate knowledge, to deal with traditional adequate knowledge, and have also the traditional knowledge, not adequate, you can say traditional knowledge, to deal with these disasters, and have also traditional knowledge to deal with these disasters, traditional knowledge to deal with these disasters. If we have to decentralize disaster management, CBDM is the best bet. That is community-based disaster management. CBDM is the best bet. is the best bet. Community-based disaster management is the best bet. Best way, you can also write best way. Clear? Now in CBDM we can see that institution, one institution, and this is the schools, local schools would play a very significant role. Right down in CBDM, the local school, in CBDM, the local school would play a significant role. The local school would play a significant role. And why we are saying it would be playing a significant role? Because it would be performing multifarious functions. Right down, it would perform multifarious functions. It would perform multifarious functions. It would perform multifarious functions. Multifarious functions. It would perform multifarious functions. Clear? Multifarious functions. It would be acting as a shelter home. It would be acting as a shelter home. Shelter home. Food distribution center. Food distribution center. Center for medical relief. Center for medical relief. Medical relief. Among many other functions. Among many other functions. Center for medical relief among many other functions. Many other functions. Clear? So that would be done among many other functions. So it would be performing multi. But the biggest challenge before CBDM is what? The enhancing frequency of disasters due to global warming and climate change. Right on. But the biggest challenge before CBDM, challenge before CBDM is enhancement in the frequency of disaster. Is enhancement in the frequency of disasters. Enhancement in the frequency of disasters. Frequency of disasters. But the biggest challenge before CBDM is enhancement in the frequency of disasters due to global warming and climate change. Due to global warming and climate change. Global warming and climate change. And see, if suppose the frequency of disasters have enhanced, so for this purpose what is essential is resource mapping, where the resources are present, or capacity building. Write down, for this purpose capacity building is essential. For this purpose capacity building is essential. Capacity building is essential. And how do we define capacity building? So capacity building is defined as what? It is defined as the encompassing of different kinds of resources available within a society or within an institution, and optimum use of these resources for mitigating the impact of disaster. Write down, capacity building has been defined as capacity building has been defined as capacity building has been defined as encompassing of all resources, that is inclusion of all resources, encompassing of all resources Available within a society. Available within a society. Within a society. Institution. Institution. Or group. Available within a society, institution, or group. Or group. An optimum use of these resources. An optimum use of these resources. Optimum use of these resources. Of these resources. For mitigating. For mitigating. The impact of disasters. For mitigating the impact of disasters. That's how we define capacity building. Encompassing of all resources available within a society, institution, or a group, and optimum use of these resources for mitigating the impact of disaster. That's how in disaster management, capacity building has been defined. We have discussed how carrying capacity of environment is defined. Carrying capacity is the capacity of an ecosystem or the environment to sustain itself in the future. So that's called as the carrying capacity. So here we are talking about the capacity building. So all these are the different terms. And then another term is called as what? It is called as mainstreaming disaster management. Now, when we talk about mainstreaming disaster management, there are three connotations of mainstreaming disaster management. The first connotation is what? That the projects which have been established either by the government agencies or even by the private agencies, funded by the private agencies or funded by the government agencies, should be designed in such a manner, should be designed in such a manner, designed in such a manner so that it should be designed in such a manner so that the impact, the vulnerability of disaster, not vulnerability, potential risk, one can say, potential risk of disasters do not enhance. So all those projects which either have been funded by government agency or either have been funded by private agencies should be designed in such a manner that the impact of the potential risk of disasters do not take place. So that's the first thing. Second thing is what? Second thing is what? That these projects should also be designed in such a manner that the impact of disasters do not fall on other sphere like social sphere, like economic sphere. So it does not fall on other sphere. And the third thing is what? That suppose you have invested a lot in disaster management, but disaster do not happen. So what will happen to your investment? So the third connection is what? That it says that third connection says that one of the objective of disaster risk reduction initiative should be human development as well. And the type of development that we are talking about is nothing but sustainable development, because sustainable development is intertwined with disaster risk reduction. So if sustainable development is not there, disaster risk reduction cannot take place. So it is intertwined with disaster risk reduction. So there are three connotations of the term mainstreaming as such. Right now, mainstreaming disaster management. Mainstreaming disaster management. Mainstreaming disaster management. Mainstreaming disaster management. Right now, it includes yes, panchayats. See, panchayats cannot be considered as community-based disaster management. Decentralization of democracy is through panchayat system. Everybody knows. Clear. So we can see the municipalities at the district level and the panchayats as the rural level also. So that's decentralization. But if suppose the panchayat takes any initiative for mitigating the impact of disaster management, that would be community-based disaster management. Mainstreaming disaster management. It includes three connotations. It includes three connotations. Three connotations. Three meanings. It includes three connotations. First, projects. Projects funded by projects funded by government. Projects funded by government or private agencies. Government or private agencies. Government or private agencies should be designed in such a manner. Should be designed in such a manner. Designed in such a manner that the potential risk of disasters do not enhance. Should be designed in such a manner that the potential risk of disasters do not enhance. Potential risk of disasters do not enhance. Do not enhance. Potential risk of disasters do not enhance. First. Second, these projects should also be designed in such a manner. First is your potential risk does not enhance. These projects should also be designed in such a manner. Designed in such a manner. Such a manner that when disaster takes place. That when disaster takes place. Should be designed in such a manner that when disaster occurs. When disaster takes place, the impact is not on other spheres. The impact is not on other spheres. The impact is not on other spheres. Other spheres means what? It means the social sphere or the economic sphere. It's not that disaster happens, the area becomes backward. It's not that the disaster happens, the GDP of that area falls. Clear? So we cannot say that the income of that area reduces. So it should not be like that. And the third thing is what? That one of the objectives of disaster risk reduction initiative should be human development as well. Write down one of the objectives of disaster risk reduction initiative. One of the objective of disaster risk reduction initiative. Disaster risk reduction initiative should be human development as well. Should be human development as well. One of the objective of disaster risk reduction initiative should be human development as well. And why we are talking about human development? And the type of development should be sustainable in nature, because sustainable development is only associated with disaster management, right? And the type of development should be sustainable in nature. And the type of development should be sustainable in nature. Type of development should be sustainable in nature. Sustainable in nature. Clear? Now these are the terms that you have to be aware of. See, when you talk about disasters in India can be divided into 5 different categories. 5 different categories. So there was a high power committee constituted by the government, and this high power committee gave its recommendation in 1991. According to which 31 different kinds of disasters were identified in India. 31 different kinds of disasters were identified in India, and they were placed under five categories, and they were placed under five categories. Now, the first category is what? The first category is water and climate related disaster. Water and climate related disasters. So that's the first category. Water and climate related disasters. Climate related disasters. For example, floods, droughts, tsunami, heat wave, cold wave, floods, droughts, tsunami, heat wave, cold wave. Then also lightning and thunder. We discussed heat wave when we discussed jet streams. We discussed cold wave when we discussed SSW, sudden stratospheric warming, lightning and thunder. Then also, not only lightning and thunder, but also we can see hailstorm. Clear? And not only hailstorm would be discussed, also avalanche, tropical cyclones, So floods, droughts, tsunami, heat wave, cold wave, lightning, thunder, hailstorm, avalanche, tropical cyclones. All these are what? All these are water and climate related disaster. The second category is what? It is called as geologically related disasters. Geologically related disasters. Which includes what? Which includes earthquakes, dam bursting, landslides. These are geologically related disasters. Third category is called as what? Third category is industrial disasters. Which includes what? Industrial disaster includes what? It includes chemical disaster, for example, Bhopal gas tragedy, chemical disaster, nuclear disaster, nuclear disaster, mines tragedy or mine disaster. Then we can see fourth category is another big category, and it includes accident related disasters. So fourth category is accident related disasters. It includes what? It includes rail accident. So that can be asked. We'll discuss how it occurs. Rail accident, road accident, air accident, air crash also takes place, air accident, building collapse, can see Mumbai due to excessive rainfall. Very frequently building collapses. Boat capsizing, sinking of boats. Boat capsizing. The only reason in India is overloading of boats. Then we can see not only boat capsizing. See, in India, terrorist attack has not been recognized as a disaster, but serial bomb blast is a disaster. So, if suppose serial bomb blast is in the form of terrorist attack, then it can be considered as a disaster. So, serial bomb blast. Serial bomb blast. So, all these are, and also wildfires, that is forest fires. Then oil spill, electrical disaster. So all these are what? All these are accident related disasters. Building collapse, boat capsizing, serial bomb blast, wildfires, oil spill, electrical disaster, rail accident, road accident, stampede. So, sudden rush of mob, stampede. So this also has been identified as a disaster. So all these are accident related disasters. Then we can see another category is what? The last category, and that is called as the biologically related disaster. Biologically related disaster. Now that includes what? That includes biological related disaster. That includes epidemics, cattle epidemics, food poisoning, food poisoning. So all these are different types of, take a screenshot of this. All these types of different types of disaster which has been identified in India. Which has been identified in India. Fine. Take a screenshot of this. And some disasters we have to discuss in detail. For example, floods, droughts. Also, cloud bursting is present here. So I'm writing again cloud bursting. Heat wave already I have done when we discussed jet stream. Cold wave also SSW, you can see your copy. Sudden stratospheric warming we have discussed. In that I have discussed cold wave, and heat wave we have discussed when we discussed jet stream. Then we can see tropical cyclones. So all these things are essential. Earthquakes, landslides, chemical disasters, nuclear disasters, mines tragedy, wildfires. Clear. Now we'll discuss rail accident also. It has taken place. Oil spill also. We have discussed the bioremediation. All those processes can be used while writing oil spill. Then epidemics we'll discuss today. Clear. So all these disasters, one by one. Let us pick up first of all earthquakes. See, as far as India is concerned, there are 4 seismic zones in India. 4 seismic zones in India. 2, 3, 4, 5. And out of these 4, we can see that 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of these 4, we can see zone 5 is the most vulnerable zone. Zone 5 is the most vulnerable zone. Now, zone 5 exists where? It exists in Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. It exists in North Bihar also. North Bihar also. Take a screenshot. I remove this. It takes place in, it is in present in North Bihar also, northeast area, then also Andaman and Nicobar Island, and also Bhuj area of Gujarat. So all these are present in zone 5, which is the most vulnerable zone. But the main reason of earthquakes in India is subduction of the Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. So Indian plate is constantly going subducting under the Eurasian plate, which is the main reason for earthquakes in India. Clear? Main reason behind earthquakes in India is the subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. Main reason behind earthquakes in India. And as far as subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. Now, as far as this subduction is concerned, this subduction is taking place constantly. And this is the reason behind earthquakes in India. But we can also say, in other words, that the margin of Himalaya is being redefined. And why is the margin of Himalaya being redefined? Margin of Himalaya is being redefined because Himalaya is the youngest mountain range of the world. Himalaya is the youngest mountain range of the world. It is in the phase of its formation. That's why the margin of Himalaya is being redefined, and that's why we say that earthquakes occur in India. The earth inside is in a molten stage where boulders are present. Now they are responsible for striking against each other. They are also responsible for separating from each other. When they strike against each other, when they separate from each other, energy would be generated. That would be in the form of seismic energy. That's how earthquake can be defined. Clear? As far as Andaman and Nicobar Island is concerned, Andaman and Nicobar Island has nothing to do with the Himalayan region, the subduction of the Indian plate under. The earthquake vulnerability in Andaman and Nicobar Island is due to the Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. You can see that this is, suppose, the Indian subcontinent. This is, here is Andaman and Nicobar Island. So here we can see that Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra arc is present, which is responsible for earthquake. The 2004 tsunami occurred because of this subduction arc. Because of this subduction arc, 2004 tsunami occurred. Clear? So it can be due to Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc that the earthquakes takes place. Clear? It can be due to Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc that the earthquake takes place. Now, next thing that you have to remember in this case is what? That as far as earthquake is concerned, Bhuj area of Gujarat is also vulnerable to earthquake. But in Bhuj area of Gujarat, there is subduction of, there is not subduction, we can see confluence of three plates. One is Indian plate, second is Eurasian plate, and third is Arabian plate. So you can see in the Bhuj area of Gujarat, there is confluence of three plates, the Indian plate, the Eurasian plate, and also the Arabian plates. That's why Bhuj is vulnerable. And in Bhuj, it is not for the first time that the earthquake has occurred. Earthquake occurred also earlier in Bhuj. Earthquake took place earlier in Bhuj. And this earthquake took place earlier in Bhuj. How? This was in 70 years before. See, earthquake in Bhuj in the recent time has taken place in the year 2001. But earlier, 70 years before, also in Bhuj, earthquake took place, which was responsible for formation of a landform, which was called as what? It was called as Allahaband. So, formation of a landform took place, which was called as what? Which was called as Allahaband. Formation of a landform took place, which is called as Allahaband. So, that took place in Bhuj area of Gujarat. Fine. Bhuj area of Gujarat, that took place. So, that's 77 years before 2001 it took place. But the vulnerability of Bhuj is why? Because of the confluence of three plates. Now, sometimes you can see that vulnerability enhances also. And vulnerability enhances due to a number of consideration. Clear? Yes, I'll draw. Just I'm draw. I'm going to draw. I'm going to draw. Don't worry about that. So vulnerability enhances due to, see, this is suppose here is your Bhuj area of Gujarat. Here we can see subduction of three plates has taken place. The Eurasian plate, the Arabian plate, and the Indian plate. So this is Bhuj. Here is Andaman and Nicobar, Sumatra subduction arc. And this whole area is vulnerable for subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. Under the Eurasian plate. Clear? Subduction of Indian plate is taking place under the Eurasian plate, which is enhancing the vulnerability for earthquakes in India. But there are factors which are responsible for enhancing vulnerability of India. An enhancement in the vulnerability of India has taken place due to excessive withdrawal of underground water. And why we are saying excessive withdrawal of underground water? Because underground water acts as an absorber of seismic waves. So underground water is acting as what? It is acting as absorber of seismic waves. So it acts as an absorber of seismic waves. So if you are responsible for excessive withdrawal of underground water, which has taken place in India due to green revolution, we can see that the vulnerability for earthquakes would be enhancing certainly. That's one reason. Vulnerability of earthquakes also would be enhancing if you construct dams and reservoirs. Because if you are going to construct support dams, this volume of water would be exerting a pressure on the plates, because of which the seismic activities can get triggered. Seismic activities would be started. Clear? So this can happen also. And this is also one of the reasons for earthquakes in India. So this can also happen, and it is considered to be one of the reason for earthquakes in India also. And also we can see that vulnerability can also enhance if we do not adhere to, if we are not responsible for adhering to, if we are not responsible for sticking to seismic norms. There are certain guidelines in the high risk zone for earthquakes. So if we do not abide by that guidelines also, vulnerability would be enhancing. For example, suppose I say that as far as earthquakes in India is concerned, see, this area, whole area is zone 5. Zone 5. This is also zone 5. This area is zone 4. Delhi, etc. And then the remaining area is zone 3 and 2. 3 and 2, here also zone 4 is present. Latur, etc. Zone 4 is, so it's not even as such. But as far as India is concerned, we can see the vulnerability would be enhancing due to a number of reasons. And one reason is non-adherence to seismic norms. Clear? Non-adherence to seismic norms. And if suppose we are saying non-adherence to seismic norms, it means what? That we are not abiding by the guidelines given for seismic zones. For example, 80% of buildings in metropolitan cities of India do not abide by the National Building Code. National Building Code is what? A guideline, set of guidelines given by the government for making of buildings. 80% of structures in metropolitan cities of India do not abide by the National Building Code. So these are the gaps in earthquake management. See, earthquakes, we know it cannot be forecasted, and no writing about the movement of ants and the movement of buffaloes, etc. as a measure. You are asking me questions of cloning in disaster management? Sorry, in cloning, but I'll answer. In cloning, you have said that in one case, clone would be exact of the donor. But how it is possible that egg provider and the donor would be the same? Why it is not possible? The egg would be taken from the lady, and from her somatic cell, the nucleus would be extracted. What is wrong in that? As for any reproduction, two different sexes are required. See, here there is no sex required. The sex would be that of the donor. And here reproduction is not taking place. No fertilization is taking place. Simply we are responsible for transferring the nucleus for. In cloning, egg provider would always be a female and a donor would always be a male. Not necessary. Female can also be a donor. If suppose the skin cell of the female is taken, from there the nucleus is extracted, why should not the she be a donor as such? Clear? She can be a donor also. She is a female, her egg cell is extracted, her egg cell is taken, from her egg the nucleus is removed. Then from her somatic cell the nucleus would be extracted and transferred to the egg. What's wrong in that? Because she is the donor. See, there is no insurance policy in India. We have liability laws as far as nuclear disaster, nuclear plant disaster is concerned. See, there is a nuclear insurance pool for nuclear disaster in which the manufacturer and the supplier is responsible for contributing. Manufacturer is the controller of nuclear installation in India. Supplier is the company which would be responsible for fuel supply to that nuclear plant. Clear? And no writing about the movement of ants, the movement of buffaloes, etc. So we know that the earthquakes cannot be forecasted, but some countries like US, Taiwan, and Japan, they have developed a not forecasting system, but an alert system for earthquakes. Let's know how. Let's know how an alert system has been developed. Let's see. When you talk about seismic waves, there are two types of waves. One is the horizontal waves, which are more damaging, and second is the vertical waves. Now, if suppose this is the building by virtue of its weight and by rotation of earth would be having a frequency of its own. So the vertical waves which occur can be balanced by the frequency of the building. But if horizontal waves occur, then the building is bound to get destroyed to a greater extent, damaged to a certain extent. So we can see that in earthquakes, there would be a difference between, there would be a damage done by the horizontal waves more when compared to vertical waves. When compared to vertical waves, horizontal waves would be responsible for more and more of damage. Clear? Horizontal waves would be responsible for more and more of damage. And sometimes it may happen that the frequency of the seismic waves may match the frequency of the building. So if the frequency of the seismic waves matches the frequency of the building, there would be a resonance effect due to matching of frequency. A resonance effect. There would be a resonance effect, and due to this resonance effect, what will happen is that more damage would be done to the building. So first of all, we have to prevent this kind of effect. And for this purpose, there should be a mismatch between the two frequencies done. How can you do a mismatch between the frequency of seismic waves and that of the building? How can it be conducted? We have to take the example of Pashupatinath temple. See, Kathmandu suffered from an earthquake in the year 2014-15, and devastated was Kathmandu because of this earthquake, Nepal earthquake. But we can see damage was not done to Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu. It's not the blessing of God which was responsible. It is the structure of Pashupatinath temple which was responsible. the structure of Pasupatinath temple which was responsible for this. Clear? Not the blessing of God which was responsible. Structure of Pasupatinath temple which was responsible for this. And what is the structure of Pasupatinath temple which was responsible for this? We can see that Pasupatinath temple, the joints are made of wooden pieces. And these wooden structures have not been nailed, because if they are nailed, they would be behaving as a single integrated unit. They have been grooved. So when earthquakes occur, they would be rubbing against each other but wouldn't be getting damaged. So if suppose you have to develop a resonance between, a mismatch between the frequency of seismic waves and that of the building to disallow the resonance effect, then we have to develop what we have to develop. We have to use wooden structure in joints which should not be nailed, instead should be grooved. Clear? So that's one thing which can be done as a precautionary measure. And as far as alert system is concerned, do remember that if suppose we are talking about the earthquakes, damage to us is done by what? Damage to us is done by S waves. S waves means you would have studied in geography surface waves. But when where the activities takes place, P waves are originating, primary waves are there, and this is S waves, surface waves, through which we are responsible for suffering from damage. There is always a time difference of 11 to 15 minutes. 11 to 15 minutes between the P and the S waves. So what they have done, the countries like US, etc. have done, they have established a dense network of small observatories. Dense network of small observatories. Network of small observatories in these areas. Clear? Small observatories in these areas. High risk seismic zones. And they are responsible for measuring the time when P waves occur. They register the time when P waves occur. Now this message would be communicated to far-flung areas for the purpose of what? For the purpose of evacuation. Clear? Far-flung areas for the purpose of evacuation. So this message would be communicated to far-flung areas for the purpose of evacuation. That's how it works. So why not in India establish this system, the alert system which has been established in? And as far as earthquake resistant building is concerned, first precautionary measure what you have to do is known to you. Second thing is what? That this is the building, earthquake, suppose this is the building in the high risk areas, and the impact on this building is why? Because this is attached to the surface. If suppose it is detached from the surface, the impact won't be there. So what we are responsible for doing is that we are responsible for using large cylinders. We are responsible for using ball bearings. So large cylinders, ball bearings would be used for detaching the buildings from the surface. We would be detaching the buildings from the surface, and so that the impact of earthquake is not on building. Now this technique is called as what? It is called as base isolation method. So from the base we are responsible for isolating the buildings. Clear? Isolating the buildings. Second thing which can be done is we can use vibration dampers for this purpose. So we can use viscous liquid carbon fibers near the base of this building, and this would be responsible for what? This would be responsible for absorbing the seismic waves. Absorbing the seismic waves. So vibration dampers can be used for this purpose also. Clear? Vibration dampers can be used for this purpose. So all these are there. As far as relief measure is concerned, we would be responsible for what? We would be responsible for relief measures. Also we can use snaking robots. Snaking robot means the robots which penetrate inside the debris and they send signals whether a person is alive or not in that. So that can be done. Or we can use UAVs for this purpose also. UAVs for this purpose can be used. Is that clear? So this much in earthquake management. Write down. There are four seismic zones in India. There are four seismic zones in India. Four seismic zones in India. Four seismic zones in India. Zone 2, Zone 2, 3, 4 and 5. Zone 2, 3, 4 and 5. Out of which, out of which, in biotechnology, can't you ask me those questions if suppose you have failed to understand? See, Jhelum river bridge made earthquake residence bridge. What is that? Please spell out clearly. Sir, in biotechnology, some topics I could not understand. And tomorrow, I think your last class. So, would you give us some extra time for revising those topics today? Tomorrow, revise. You can directly ask me. You have my numbers. You can directly ask me also. Clear. Just get time from me and you can call me and also ask me. It's not an issue. I'll repeat those. Zone 2, 3, 4 and 5. Out of which, out of which, Zone 5 is the most vulnerable zone. Out of which, Zone 5 is the most vulnerable zone. Zone 5 is the most vulnerable zone. 5 is the most vulnerable zone. Is the most vulnerable zone. Clear, vulnerable zone. It includes Jammu and Kashmir. It includes Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Uttarakhand, North Bihar, North Bihar, the entire Northeast region, Andaman and Nicobar Island, Andaman and Nicobar Island, Nicobar Island, and Bhuj area of Gujarat, Bhuj area of Gujarat, Andaman and Nicobar Island, and Bhuj area of Gujarat, Bhuj area of Gujarat, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, North Bihar, Northeast region, Andaman and Nicobar Island, Bhuj area of Gujarat. Right now, the main reason behind earthquakes in India, the main reason behind earthquakes in India, earthquakes in India, would be the subduction of Indian plate, would be the subduction of Indian plate, subduction of Indian plate, of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate, under the Eurasian plate, subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate, or in other words, okay, now, or in other words, just let's complete me the sentence. Or in other words, we can say that the margin of Himalayas is being redefined. Or in other words, we can say that the margin of Himalayas is being redefined. Margin of Himalayas is being redefined. 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 And why it is being redefined? Because it is the youngest mountain range in the world. It is still in the phase of its formation. Right on, as it is the youngest mountain range in the world, as it is the youngest mountain range in the world, youngest mountain range in the world, still in the phase of its formation, as it is the youngest mountain range in the world, still in the phase of its formation, still in the phase of its formation. And see why Jhelum Bridge has been called as earthquake resistant bridge. Earthquake resistant bridge. See, Jhelum, Jammu and Kashmir, is what? It is an earthquake prone area. So all necessary measures has been taken that if earthquakes occur, this bridge won't be broken. Clear? So that's why it is called as earthquake resistant bridge. Because generally what happens when earthquakes occur, dam burst, bridges they are shattered, they break. But all precautionary measures have been taken that this bridge won't be breaking down. So that's why it is called as earthquake resistant bridge. Main reason. And subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate, we can see that the margin of Himalayas is being redefined, that I have said. Now remember also that the vulnerability of Andaman and Nicobar Island is due to Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. Right down. Now this is the reason for the Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, North Bihar, Northeast. We understand subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. But what about Andaman and Nicobar Islands? Nowhere near Himalayas. So vulnerability of Andaman and Nicobar Island is due to the Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. Right down. Vulnerability of Andaman and Nicobar Island. Vulnerability of Andaman and Nicobar Island. Andaman and Nicobar Island is due to Andaman and Nicobar is due to Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. Andaman and Nicobar Sumatra subduction arc. Is that clear? Fine. And this was responsible for also the 2004 tsunami. And we can see vulnerability of Bhuj is why? Vulnerability of Bhuj is due to confluence of three plates, the Indian plate, Eurasian plate, and also the Arabian plate. Right down. Vulnerability of Bhuj is high. Vulnerability of Bhuj is high due to confluence of three plates. Due to confluence of three plates. That is Arabian plate, Indian plate, and Eurasian plate. See, recently earthquake was witnessed in Turkey. So 2023 Turkey earthquake took place. Why? It took place why? Because Turkey is, although it is situated on the Anatolian plate, this is at the confluence of three plates. And the plates include what? The plates include African, Arabian, and Eurasian plate. And the Turkey earthquakes were considered as shallow earthquakes because the first shock was only 17 kilometer deep, and the second shock was 10 kilometer deep inside. So they are considered as what? They are considered as shallow earthquakes. And there were more than 100 aftershocks. Generally what happens? That when subduction takes place, pressure would be generated in the fault lines. And when pressure is generated in the fault lines, they would be released in the form of seismic energy. Right down. Recently, that is 2023, Turkey earthquake occurred, which was considered to be devastating in nature, as these earthquakes were shallow earthquakes, as these earthquakes were shallow earthquakes, because the epicenter was in one case 17-kilometer deep, and in the second case it was 10-kilometer deep, as these were considered to be shallow earthquakes. And there were more than 100 aftershocks, and there were more than 100 aftershocks, more than 100 aftershocks, and there were more than 100 aftershocks. Clear? So they were considered as shallow earthquakes, and there were more than 100 aftershocks. And as far as Turkey is considered, Turkey is situated on the Anatolian plate, which falls at the confluence of three plates of the world: Arabian, African, and Eurasian plate. Right now, Turkey is situated at the confluence of Eurasian, African, and Arabian plate. Eurasian, African, and Arabian plates. Clear? So these are the regions behind earthquakes. But vulnerability of earthquakes would be enhancing due to excessive withdrawal of underground water, because underground water acts as an absorber of seismic waves. Right on. Vulnerability for earthquakes would be enhancing. Vulnerability for earthquakes would be enhancing. Due to excessive withdrawal of underground water, excessive withdrawal of underground water, which acts as absorber of seismic waves, Clear? So that is how the vulnerability of earthquakes would be enhancing. And vulnerability of earthquakes would also enhance due to construction of dams and reservoirs, because dams and reservoirs would be exerting pressure on the plates. It can also enhance due to construction of dams and reservoirs. It can also enhance due to construction of dams and reservoirs, and can also enhance due to non-adherence to the seismic norms. It can also enhance due to non-adherence to seismic norms. And in this context, we can see more than 80% of structures in metropolitan cities of India do not abide by the National Building Code. More than 80% of structures, that's a building, more than 80% of structures in metropolitan cities of India, do not abide by National Building Code. National Building Code. So there is a set of guidelines according to which the building should be constructed. So we can see that they are not abiding by the National Building Code. Clear? They are not responsible for abiding by the National Building Code. And that's one of the reasons for earthquakes in India. Fine. enhancement in the vulnerability of earthquakes in India. So they are not abiding by the national building code as such. So that's another thing that you have to know. And as far as the damage done by earthquakes is concerned, remember that the horizontal waves are more damaging when compared to the vertical waves. Right on. The horizontal waves are more damaging. The horizontal waves are more damaging. Horizontal waves are more damaging when compared to the vertical waves. When compared to the vertical waves, horizontal waves are more damaging when compared to the vertical waves. Vertical waves. Clear? And we can see vertical waves. Horizontal waves are more damaging when compared to the vertical waves. And the damage would be more severe if frequency of the vertical waves, if the horizontal waves matches with that of the building. Right down. The damage would be more severe. The damage would be more severe. More severe. If frequency of seismic waves, if frequency of seismic waves matches with that of with that of buildings. Frequency of seismic waves matches with that of buildings. So damage would be more severe. Clear? If the frequency of seismic waves matches with that of building, because this would be responsible for developing resonance effects right on, as resonance effect would be developed. As resonance effect would be developed. Resonance effect would be developed. But then, having said so, we know that earthquakes cannot be forecasted, but at least an alert system can be developed for that purpose, as has been developed in countries like US, Taiwan and Japan. Right on. Although earthquakes cannot be forecasted, although earthquakes cannot be forecasted, earthquakes cannot be forecasted, but an alert system, but an alert system can be developed, but an alert system can be developed. Alert system can be developed like that in US, like that in US, Taiwan and Japan, like that in US, Taiwan and Japan, Taiwan and Japan. So alert system can be developed for this purpose. Clear? And how this is working? Now this works on the time difference between the P waves and S waves. Clear? So we'll take this after the break, that how it works, and we'll try to complete this portion today. Thank you. Take a break.